Welcome back, and this is our second edition of English Grammaire Expression Écrite. As I said, so in the other video, fairly long, I think it's about 50 minutes, we talked about relative clauses. We really kind of went through the various cases, a lot of differences between, there's defining, non-defining, and the different roles that a relative pronoun plays. And then I said we'd move on to appositive clauses. And it's important to sort of pay attention to the difference between these two things because they can seem similar. And one of the reasons they seem similar is that when we have an appositive clause is essentially a that clause that is a post modifier, and it refers to the same thing as the head noun. So it's easy to see that if we have a relative clause with that in it, that's a post modifier in a noun phrase, that it might look a lot like a that clause that's also a post modifier in a noun phrase. And so it's important to sort of draw distinctions there. So one thing to perhaps remind you of would be basically what an appositive is. We can have an appositive noun and an appositive clause. So once again, this involves a review of noun phrases. So we can look at an appositive. Let's say an appositive noun would be something like it could be. This might be an example that I gave you before. We could say the River Thames, for example, there. Now, if we look at the River Thames, we can ask ourselves, how many things are we talking about? We're talking about only one thing. There's only one river that we're referring to, right? But at the same time, we have two nouns here. We have river and we have Thames, right? So what this means is we have, if we're going to also look at the structure here, we're going to say the head noun is going to be river. Now we know that it's river, because notice we have a determiner, right? Now, if Thames, which is a proper noun, a name, was the head noun, we would not have a determiner, right? We don't, for example, Charles, we say, let's say King Charles, right? Charles is actually the head noun in King Charles, and that's why we don't say the King Charles, although we say le roi Charles en français. So here we can see that, I get it. We have river, right, is the head noun because we have a determiner, right? And if you remember from the structure of the head noun, there is sort of a special relationship. There is what we call agreement also between the determiner and the head noun. So the presence of this determiner is really owing to the fact that we have what we call a common noun, just sort of the more typical noun, not a proper noun. When we say common noun, in this context, we mean not a proper noun. So yes, the river is the head noun, right? And then we have Thames, which we're just giving the name for the river. It's another way to refer to the same river, right? We're referring into it both with a common noun and a proper noun, okay? So what is an appositive? Basically, it is a noun or a noun phrase. It just so happens that Thames is, in this case, just one proper noun that refers to the same thing as the head noun, and it's put after it. It's a post modifier, right? Thames is a post modifier. And we can show it by we can say which river, the river is the Thames, and we could say that. I'm writing it. The river is the Thames, right? And if you remember when we talked about, going back to sentence patterns, here we have the river is the Thames. We have is, so we have to be as our verb phrase. Sorry, we have to be as our verb phrase. That means that the river is our subject, right? And the Thames is our subject complement. And what we said about subject complements is they refer to the same. We only have one referent, right? So in a sense, you can think of appositives function as far as the referent is concerned in the same way as subject complements or subject predicatives, if you prefer, right? They refer to the same thing. Here we have the Thames refers to the same thing as river, the head noun, and here we have the Thames refers to the same thing as river, the subject, right? So that's the basic way that appositives, when we say appositive, we usually mean an appositive noun, okay? So now when we talk about appositive clauses, right? Obviously a clause, every time we talk about a clause, we talk about a verbal structure. We're saying, so we have a verbal structure. Instead of having this second noun, the Thames referring to the head noun, we have a verbal structure that refers to the head noun, and in a sense that means that they're equivalent, right? So I could say something like the idea that it is raining. I can say that. Okay. So here we notice that we have, first of all, we have the idea that it is raining. It is a noun phrase, right? It's important to understand that it is raining is a part of that noun phrase, right? It isn't just that clause that's sort of hanging off in space, right? So when we have this, and it's a post mod, that means it's the post modifier in the noun phrase. So it's important to see that in this case that it is raining refers to is the expression of the idea. It is the idea. It has the same referent, right? And we can prove this in the same way that we prove that Thames was the appositive of the river, or that it referred to the same thing. We can rewrite that clause that is a post modifier, which means that it's an appositive clause, right? We can rewrite it as the subject complement, right, using the verb to be. So all I have to do is add is there. I'm going to do that. We can say the idea is that it is raining, right? So that means the idea is going to be the subject. I'm just going to write is really quickly. I just added it and I underlined it, right? Here we have the idea as the subject, and that it is raining. The structure of that it is raining, of course, is it going to be that clause, and the function is going to be a subject complement, or if you prefer, a subject predicative. And once again, what we said about subject complements or subject predicatives is that means we have the copulative pattern and they refer to the same thing. So here we just have and we can say idea equals it is raining. That's another, we can sort of say that. Which just means that we have an equivalency between idea, right, and raining. The thing to note is this only works with certain kinds of head nouns. These are head nouns that refer to, I would say, words, or I would say ideas or concepts. For example, I could say the concept that it is raining, the proposition that it is raining. That might be a little bit. I could say this statement that it is raining. So sentence, statement, the utterance that it is raining, right? And so on, right? A concept, idea. I get it. Well, I'm not going to be able to use it with a noun that refers to something. I'm not going to be able to say, for example, the pen that it is raining. I'm not going to be able to have an appositive clause with that type of head noun. So that's basically it. I'm not going to say much more about that in our basic description of appositive clauses. But what we're going to do is move on to the document that you have received that concerns the comparison between appositive clauses and relative clauses. So I'm going to read it now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to sort of take out this document. We're going to see how this works once again. We're doing what we can, a little bit of improvisation. I'm actually going to have a sip of coffee, of tea actually, and I'm going to try to. I wrote out. This is something I've done for some of you in class last week. But I'm going to. I have these sort of. These are demonstrations, right? And I did one on the board. I actually wrote out demonstrations to prove that something is. The first one is going to prove that something is in a positive clause, and the second one is going to be that it is to prove that something is a relative clause. So the idea is going to be sort of how do you show this? So as we said, there is on the surface appositive clauses and relative clauses. They look the same. They're both post modifiers and they have that in it, right? So hopefully you've had some way of sort of appreciating that they're different from the presentation that we just had on appositive clauses. But now that the way to really sort of understand it more fully is to actually prove it, right? So we're going to sort of practice doing that. Okay. So I'm going to kind of read through this example. So here I'm just reading what you have, also because you have the same document. Maybe you've printed it up. I don't know how you're watching this at the same time. But we have this. But the presentation is as follows. Question: show that the following underlying clause is either a relative or an appositive. Right. So just what I said. We have to show either one. So you have to first of all determine which one it is. And here we have a sentence. The concept that light can bend is difficult to grasp. And we notice that the underlying words are that light can bend. Okay. So first of all, you should look at that and say, okay, convince yourself that we're dealing with a noun phrase, and then we have a post modifier. So we have the concept, and then that like can bend. If we replace the concept with it, we're not going to say it that like can bend, right? Which shows that that like can bend actually is a part of that noun phrase. So our noun phrase is the concept that like can bend, right? We could say it is difficult to grasp instead of that group of words. That means that that like can bend is a post modifier. Okay, first thing, great. So the question, okay, well, we have a post modifier with that in it. It's a verbal structure, can bend, right? So we have a verbal structure with that in it. So we ask ourselves, what is it? Okay, so here, now we're going to kind of go through these tests. Now, we said that the fundamental principles are that we're, first of all, we have a that clause, right? Okay. And that we also want to show that it refers to the head noun. So that's what we said in that first sentence there, which is to prove that that like can bend is in a positive clause. It suffices to show that it's a that clause, first of all, that refers to the head noun, and second of all, first of all, that it's a that clause, and also that it refers to the head noun of the noun phrase in which it appears. Okay, so those are the two conditions. So we're going to take care of that first condition. First, we want to prove that it's a that clause. So what did we write? Firstly, that like can bend appears to be a that clause because the complement of that, which is like can bend, is a complete utterance. Okay, so I could perhaps explain that. What do we mean there? What we mean is, if you remember, when we have the that clause, that is what we call a subordinating conjunction or a subordinator. What does that mean? We did this with because, while. We can use as or since. If I say something like tea is delicious, that's a sentence, right? If I add a subordinate, what subordinators do, they take things that would have been sentences and make them not sentences, which means what follows a subordinator is what we call a complete utterance, which means it's something that it could be a sentence in a different context. So what we're doing here is we look at like can bend. That could be that's a sentence. That could be a perfect sentence. I could have a capital L, and I could just put a period, or if you prefer, a full stop after bend, and we have a full sentence. The role of that is to make something that would have been a sentence not a sentence. Just like we could say like can bend. The same thing happens if we put because in it, because in front of it, and so on, right? Because like can bend, and any kind of subordinator makes something that would have been a sentence not a sentence. So we say, we get rid of that, and we see what follows, and it's a sentence. So that is one way of showing that we have a that clause. So that is our conclusion. So I'm continuing. I continue reading the document that you have. It follows that is a subordinator and not a relative clause, which means that like can bend is a that clause. Okay, fine. So secondly, now we've established that we're dealing with that clause, and essentially, if you prefer that's sort of the structure of the thing, right? So now we can say, let's go about what is this that clause doing in this noun phrase. So what we have to show, if it's in a positive, that or the second condition, if you remember, is to show that it's the same. It refers to the same thing as the head noun. So that is what it means when we have our next part when we say, and I'm reading again. Secondly, that like can bend seems to refer to the same thing as concept, the head noun of the phrase in which it appears, because it can be written as the subject complement of concept. And then we have this manipulation. The concept is that like can bend. So what have we done? We've taken our noun phrase, the concept that like can bend, and just like what we did before, we have sort of inserted a verb there to be, right? That is the typical copulative verb. The concept is that like can bend, and we've written our that club in this case that we've made that like can bend be a subject complement. And as you remember, subject complements are what we call co-referential to the subject. They refer to the same thing, same referent. So that has shown that, yes, that makes sense. The fact that we can do that means that our that clause refers to the same thing as the head noun. And that's what that secondly is about. That's it. And then in the summary, we have shown that like can bend is a that clause that refers to the same thing as the head noun or the head noun phrase in which it appears. I'm just reading what I've written there, and that is we're just summing up those two things we've proved. So hopefully you're satisfied with that. That I would view that as a sufficient demonstration that that group of words is in a positive clause. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next example, namely what happens if we have a relative clause. How do we show that? So what we've done, and we have our, so moving on to our next question, the example is the problem that I was referring to went away. So that's our sentence. We have that I was referring to, these are our underlined words, and we will note that they are the post modifier in the noun phrase, the problem that I was referring to. Okay, so here, notice we're focusing on that word that. As we've shown before, once we show that is a subordinator, we're well on our way. We've gone halfway to proving that it is an appositive clause. Here, if we can actually show that is a relative pronoun, that is sort of the key pivotal word, not a subordinate. Relative pronouns are not subordinators. And then we have, we've done the work. We've shown that we are, in fact, dealing with a relative clause. Relative clauses always have relative pronouns, right? Okay, so if we prove that we have a relative pronoun, we prove we have a relative clause. And that's what we say in that first sentence, to prove that I was referring to as a relative clause. It suffices to prove that is a relative pronoun. That's the first sentence. So what we said, this is what we're going to go about to do. As long it suffices to prove that is a relative pronoun. So the first thing we do is sort of go about thinking of substituting this relative. If that is a relative pronoun, we should be able to substitute other relative pronouns for it. And if you remember, when we, in the preceding video, we looked at relative clauses, and I said that, actually, we could have written that or which, or in some cases who, and so on. There are different possibilities in the zero relative pronoun, and if we can do that, that's a sign that we, that word is in that family. That category, a grammatical category of relative pronouns. So the idea is, once again, this is a manipulation. This is the method. We need manipulations. We need to have these alterations, if you prefer, these manipulations of the utterance to show that something's true. So we do this two times. We say, oh yes, let's replace. If that is indeed a relative pronoun, we can replace it with other relative pronouns, and we've seen that it works with which in this zero relative pronoun, and that is our second miniature paragraph that begins with firstly, right? So firstly that can be replaced with which, and notice we rewrite the sentence, the problem which I was referring to, that works, and the other one is the problem I was referring to without the relative pronoun. So that's good. We've just shown that works. Now, the second thing we're going to go about doing is we're aiming to prove that is a relative pronoun. Now, if it's I'm just going to sort of sum up what we've said in secondly. If it is a relative pronoun, that means it replaces a noun, right? And if you remember, we have this idea of a complete utterance. In which we replace one of the words. Pronouns replace a noun. So that means, since a noun is replaced, there's going to be, you can think of there being sort of a hole in that original statement, right? So that means what follows that, will be incomplete. If we look at what follows that in our the relative clause is that I was referring to. What follows that, I was referring to. That's not a complete utterance, right? This is completely the opposite of what happened with the appositive clause. What does that mean? That is not, what we're saying is that is not a subordinator, right? Because it's replacing a noun which is no longer there. Since there has been a replacement, we only have I was referring to. That's what we're saying in the secondly part, which leads us to our finally part, which means that since that replaces a noun phrase, we can sort of re-inject the replaced noun phrase, right? So, and what we do when in doing so, we're kind of going backwards, if you prefer, and that's what we're doing in this final paragraph that begins with finally, right? We have this idea of this re-injection. We have the part that follows. We obtain is I was referring to. We have this sort of hole there, the problem, because that is the antecedent. And this also reveals a grammatical role. This is that we find that, that we have that the problem is right after to, right, which is a preposition. That means the function of the problem is going to be the complement of a preposition, which means that is the function of the relative pronoun that replaces it, right? That is the complement of a preposition. So that's it. And then we just
sum up that we've actually proved that that is a relative pronoun. And since we've done that, that it suffices to have done that to show that the clause itself is a relative clause. That's how it works. I hope that's fairly clear. This is an example of one way to prove this. It's up to you. The idea is that you understand the method, that you understand that you need to go about doing manipulation, right? You need to rewrite the thing. We've gone about making a noun phrase into a sentence, showing that when we have a that clause, right? That's our major manipulation, and then also we've subtracted our that, and we're left with a sentence. So we've done, we've done, at least two manipulations in the first here. We've done three, actually more, but it's important to go about sort of, you can see it's a substantial proof when you go about manipulating something. That's the idea. So that's that. That is both. This has been a brief presentation of what appositives and appositive clauses are. Okay, it's important to say appositive clause to remind so it's clear that we're talking about a verbal structure and not just an appositive, which is a noun or a noun phrase, right? Okay, as we've seen in the beginning. So this has been a reminder of what appositives are, a sort of a presentation of what appositive clauses are, and then also some discussions as to how to go about proving that a clause is either an appositive or a relative clause. So I hope that's clear. As I said in the preceding video, I will be in touch with you next week. I will include more videos next week to help you prepare for our final exam, and I will hopefully we will have more information about that. So thanks very much. Take care.